Take my heart, wash my soul, renew my mind and make me whole. Take my heart.
Now the gates of Jericho were tightly shut because the people were afraid of the Israelites. No one was allowed to go in or out. But the Lord said to Joshua, I have given you Jericho, its kings and all of its strong warriors. You and your fighting men should march around the town once a day for 6 days. 7 priests will walk ahead of the ark, each carrying ram's horns. On the 7th day, you are to march around the town 7 times, with the priests blowing the horns. When you hear the priests give one long blast on the ram's horns, have all the people shout as loud as they can. Then the walls of the town will collapse, and the people can charge straight into the town. Again, what kind of strange plans are these? So Joshua, verse 6, called together the priests and said, take up the ark of the Lord's covenant. Assigned 7 priests to walk in front of it, each carrying a ram's horn. Then he gave the orders to the people, march around the town, and the armed men will lead the way in front of the ark of the Lord's men. So again, the people with the warriors, with the priests, which represented God's presence there. Verse 8, after Joshua spoke to the people, the 7 priests with the ram's horns started marching. So this is when they actually did the act. In the presence of the Lord, blowing the horns as they marched, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed behind them. Some of the armed men marched in front of the priests of the horns, and some behind the ark, with the priests continually blowing the horns. Do not shout, do not even talk, Joshua commanded. Not a single word from any of you until I tell you to shout. Then shout. So the ark of the Lord was carried around the town once that day, and then everyone returned to spend the night in the camp. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests again carried the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests with the ram's horns marched in front of the ark of the Lord, blowing their horns. Again, the armed men marched both in front of the priests with the horns and behind the ark of the Lord. All this time, the priests were blowing their horns. On the 2nd day, they again marched around town once and returned to the camp. They followed this pattern for 6 days. So we got an idea of the pattern. Then on the 7th day, in verse 15, the Israelites got up at dawn and marched around the town as they had done before, but this time they all went around the town 7 times. The 7th time around, as the priests shouted a long blast on the horns, Joshua commanded the people, shout, for the Lord has given you this town. Jericho and everything in it must be completely destroyed as an offering to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and the others in her house will be spared, for she protected our spies. Verse 18, do not take any of the things set apart for destruction, or you yourself will be completely destroyed, and you will bring trouble on the camp of Israel. Everything made from silver, gold, bronze, or iron is sacred to the Lord and must be brought into his treasury. When the people heard the sound of the ram's horns, they shouted as loud as they could. Suddenly the walls of Jericho collapsed, and the Israelites charged straight into town and captured it. They completely destroyed everything in it with their swords, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, goats, and donkeys. Meanwhile, Joshua said to the 2 spies, keep your promise. Go to the prostitute's house and bring her out along with her family. The men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father, mother, brothers, and all the other relatives who were with her. They moved her whole family to a safe place near the camp of Israel. Verse 24, then the Israelites burned the town and everything in it. Only the things made from silver, gold, bronze, or iron were kept for the treasure of the Lord's house. So Joshua spared Rahab, the prostitute, and her relatives who were with her in the house, because she had hidden the spies Joshua sent to Jericho. And she lived among the Israelites to this day. At that time, Joshua invoked this curse. May the curse of the Lord fall on anyone who tries to rebuild the town of Jericho. And the cost of his firstborn son, he will lay its foundation. At the cost of his youngest, he will set up its gates. Ouch. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his reputation spread throughout the land. A lot going on in there, a lot that can be said, but I have to be choosy because some of these themes we've actually dealt with before, like the nature of the warfare and how gruesome it was, this whole complete genocide, if you will, this whole just destruction of the whole city of people and even their pets and animals and everything else. We've talked about that before, so I'm not going to get back into that again. There is some interesting things about this curse, and there's mentioned twice these curses about bringing things to yourself, like plundering the people. No, all the plunder goes to the Lord and the house of the Lord. So there's things that we're going to recur in the future. We're going to talk about it as well. So I'm not going to touch on to that. And even this crazy curse, if you want to look into that actually was fulfilled in 1 Kings. There should be references in your Bibles. If not, I can find those for you. But interesting stories. A lot of things going on. But what I want to do is I want to talk about the nature of the walls, the nature of the conquest of Jericho, and how interesting it is in light of our own spiritual lives and spiritual walks as Christians today. And so I, of course, started the first slide by saying, say what? And the reason why is because, again, like I've already hinted on twice already, these first 5 verses sound very strange to me. What kind of battle plan is this? This is crazy. And of course, I subtitled this we say we're going to thread through victory through faith, and God or the Lord is our salvation. These are the themes. And so I see this you hit that faith, and victory comes through faith. Faith in what? Faith in what God's telling you to do. And so what he's telling them to do seems crazy. It seems weird, wild, and bizarre. These battle plans are out of the ordinary. They're unorthodox, but they're the most successful, the most beneficial plans that could ever be dreamed of by anyone. And of course, they are given by God, and God knows the best battle plan. He knows the best action for the situation. And that's what we're seeing here. And I want to discuss that, and I want to uncover that. So here's the verses again. The gates of Jericho were tightly shut. So the people were scared. They're closed these gates tightly shut. No one's able to come in and out. So how are they going to get in? That's the first point of protocol. How do we conquer Jericho? Well, we need to get through their defenses. Their defenses are tightly shut gates and fences and walls. Well, not fences, but gates and walls. So they can't get in. How are we going to get in? Well, we're going to knock the walls down. That's how we're going to do it. Okay, cool. So what do? Do we hit it with big pieces of wood and stone? No. You're going to walk around it. Now, for those of you who have some idea of like physics and like the way how things work, especially like even like archaeology, you'll know that like there's ground, and ground is soft, and there's foundations, and foundations are either strong or they're soft, and so it's important to make a strong foundation. But breaking those foundations to break the walls, isn't that not a clever idea? Rather than hitting the walls, hitting the foundation. And I think as we uncover what's going on here, that's exactly what God did. He didn't hit the walls, he hit the foundations, the things that are holding the walls up. So he said to them to do this thing, to walk around with the strong warriors and the priests, then walk around the last day, 7 days, or 7 times the last day, with everyone. And at the end, they're all going to blow these horns and they're going to shout. Okay, again, so there's a story once again. 1 Corinthians 1:25 says this: this foolish plan of God is wiser than the wisest of human plans, and God's weakness is stronger than the greatest of human strength. Again, if the human perspective at the time, looking at these walls as being, we would knock them down with walls, or we can climb the walls or whatever. We can't do that. So I'll just quit. I'll just give up. You see what could have happened? And you see what happens a lot of times in our lives all the time? Well, we can't knock these walls down. They're too big. And we can't climb the walls because the archers will take us down. There was no chance. We won't be able to do it. There's no effective, realistic way to do this thing that God's asked us to do, so I'm just going to give up. That is human nature. That's what we're all kind of tempted to do from time to time, all the time. Right? Am I not right? I mean, that's it. Like, God has to do something, we can't because these walls are too big and they're too strong. But God can see around. He can see the chinks in the armor. He can see around. He can see the weaknesses. And he saw a weakness in the foundation. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. And how is he going to break the foundation? By doing something as simple as walking around the city 7 times in a week and then 7 times on the last day. Okay? But again, God sees things that we don't. We need to trust to walk in faith. So when he gives us directions, okay, God, he may not give us the full plan. He didn't say, well, this is why I'm doing it. But he does say, but this is what I need you to do. And I need you to be faithful and humble in following my orders. So sometimes, therefore, God asks us to do crazy things. This is fun. This is going to be a fun, funny Bible study, by the way, guys. I didn't tell you that at the beginning, but it is. Look at some of the crazy things that God has asked people to do in the Bible. This is awesome. 2 Kings 5:1, you have this king of Aram that had this great admiration for Naaman, the commander of his army. So this very proud man who's commander of his great army, he was, I need attention from the greatest miraculous healer in the world. And so, because he had his leprosy, as we see here. So the Lord had, so Naaman in this mighty war, he suffered from leprosy. Okay, and then going on, this is the cure. This is the cure that God had given to Naaman to cure his leprosy. Verse 9 of 2 Kings 5. So Naaman went to the house with his horses and chariots, and waited at the door of Elijah's house. We know Elijah, he's the prophet of God. But Elijah didn't even bother coming out to greet him, this commander. He sent his messenger boy. He didn't even bother. So you can see how his pride was hurt a little bit. So there's a lot more to the details than what meets the eyes. So Elijah didn't even bother going to see him. He sends his messenger boy out. And the messenger boy says, you see that river down there, the Jordan River that belongs to Israel? Go and wash yourself in there 7 times, and then you'll be healed. And then, of course, he goes on by getting all upset and enraged. What about the great rivers and seas and this that we have in our beautiful, lush land? Why is this mucky Jordan River going to kill? Is it really the waters that cured him? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it was just a test of faith. Maybe God can heal him spiritually. But the point of the matter is, it's a simple thing. And sometimes when we're asked to do simple things, we want to complicate it and say, that's not going to fix the problem. That's too simple of a solution, God. That's not going to solve our problem, so I'm not going to do it. And he could have. That was the temptation for Naaman. Jesus said to Peter, another story. That's 4 stories. That's the first story. That's the second story. Jesus said to Peter, Matthew 17:27. This is a little simpler of a story. And I put in King James, because King James is so funny. I love King James from time to time. It's so funny. Sometimes it has to be said in King James. Go thou to the sea and cast unhook in it. No, well, unhook. I thought that and only comes before words that start with a vowel. But according to the Old King James, you can put and for emphasis. So go to the sea, cast and hook, and take up the fish that first cometh up. And when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money, and take and give unto them for me and thee. Isn't that a funny story? And I read it funny because I think it's kind of a funny language. But look at the story. Jesus asked Peter to go grab a fish, open its mouth, pull the money out, and give it to these kids. And well, they had Judas, who was the treasurer, was probably there. He said, Judas, give him a coin. But no, instead he says, go down there and get the fish. Now, of course, there's a story, there's a message behind it. But sometimes God asks us to do funny things. Why? Because it's part of our education. It's part of our learning process. And sometimes he wants to say something. Okay, here's the story. The Lord says to Ezekiel in Ezekiel 37:9, speak a prophetic message to the kings of the earth. No, speak a prophetic message to the winds. He told him to go out and talk to the wind. Son of man. And in great detail as well. Don't just talk to the wind, but talk to the wind in great detail. Speak a prophetic message and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Come, O breath from the four winds. Breathe into these dead bodies so they may live again. So imagine being Ezekiel waking up and going out and going, okay. What was I going to say again? Okay, winds, are you there? Anyways, so sometimes God has to find things, but there's reason. There's a reason. And one of the reasons for this is it was documented somehow in some way, so we can read it and appreciate it. No one at that time was ready to listen, but maybe now people are ready to listen. I mean, there's always a reason, and sometimes it takes time for it to unfold. Moses, he's problem solving with God here. Here's Moses problem solving with God. Ezekiel 15:23, which is kind of what we see with the walls of Jericho. God's problem solving. How do we conquer Jericho? Well, here's how you do it. Walk around the walls. Here's some problem solving with Moses earlier in Exodus 15:23. When they came to the oasis of Marah, the water was too bitter to drink. Marah means bitter. So they called the place Marah, which means bitter. Okay? So here's how they solved the problem. So Moses cried out unto the Lord for help. And the Lord showed him a piece of wood. Moses threw it in the water, and it made the water good to drink. Again, sometimes little simple things God has to do, and we want to overcomplicate it. But how's that wood going to solve it? Like, no, God, come on, don't be silly. Well, it solves the problem. There is some science behind it, I can guarantee it. We don't have enough details to analyze it, but also we know that God, as an ultimate being, is the creators of the molecules of this world. And he can do what he wants. He can manipulate in the way he wants. And sometimes he wants to manipulate our heart. He's more interested in our heart and manipulation of our heart than the manipulation of the molecules of the waters and the walls and the foundations of the walls. You know what I'm saying? And even the gospel is a bit crazy. That thing that we all love and take for granted. It's a bit crazy. Have you thought about that? Well, I'm sure your friends do because they question it and they reject it. Well, not all your friends, I hope, but some of them maybe. So 1 Corinthians 1 says this. And this is, I left the title because in the Bible that I was reading from, it calls this the wisdom of God. And so the message of the cross, and by the way, I took verse 25 and I already referred to it earlier. So this kind of informs that verse I brought up earlier. The message of the cross, like the walking around the walls of Jericho, is foolish to those who are headed for destruction. But we who are being saved know it is the very power of God. As the scriptures say, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and discard the intelligence of the intelligent. So, where does this leave the philosophers, the scholars, the world's brilliant debaters? God has made the wisdom of this world look foolish. Since God in his wisdom saw to it that the world would never know him through human wisdom. Again, we can analyze a lot of information. We can have certainty about so much things that we can seem to be certain about. But God can break the rules. And that's why, even to this day, many naturists, many secularists, many smarty farties want to say that there is no God because of the problem of the miracle. What is a miracle? A miracle is simply God breaking the rules. People don't like that. And so the philosophers and these intellectuals have come up with these systems that are concrete. That's it. That solves all of our problems. But when God comes, he can, if he so chooses, mess it up. He can change the rules. He can break the rules. Why? Because he's God. And that's what a miracle really is by definition. It's coming in and messing up with the rules, the things that we have so comfortably taken for granted. Since God in his wisdom saw to it that the world would never know him through human wisdom, he had used foolish preaching to save those who believe. And that's the funny thing. Preaching itself can come across as being foolish. And that's a lot of times because the content of what we're preaching seems so unbelievable. Jesus died and then he rose from the grave. It's unbelievable. It's miraculous. And we're saved through it by faith. Huh? I mean, even Christians struggle with these concepts because they're so simple and straightforward. It is the foolishness of the Greeks. Or it is foolish to the Greeks who seek human wisdom. So when we preach that Christ was crucified, the Jews are offended, and the Gentiles say it's nonsense. But to those called by God to salvation, both Jews and Gentiles, Christ is the power of God. So that's why it's about power. It's not just about understanding and intellect. It's about power. God's able to break the rules because he's powerful. Christ, the power of God, and the wisdom of God. Combined, united. And again, God used wisdom, I think, even when knocking down the walls of Jericho. It wasn't just his power, it was also his intellect. So God's combination of power and intellect, or wisdom. This foolish plan of God is wiser than the wisest of all human plans. There's no other way we can fix the problem with our minds. God's weakness is stronger than the greatest of human strength. So really quick, this is potentially a really rough image of what the city was built upon. It's built on a side of the hillside. Now, looking at that, you can see that there's a clear weakness being built up on a wall, up on a hillside like that. You know, especially if the ground was soft. And in time, ground shifts, earth shakes, shifts, and whatnot. And so, because of the laws of gravity and friction, it's being held up by certain things, like, for instance, that retaining wall. It's very important to keep the earth from sliding down and taking the city with it. So there was structural, the retaining wall. And then you also have the defensive walls, like the lower and the upper wall. So if you look at that, you can use common sense. If the ground itself is weakened to a point where it stops supporting the retaining walls, what's going to happen to the defensive walls? They're just going to fall down. So there is some science, and here's the thing that I like. I'm just going to read this verbatim so you guys can read along with me verbatim. These are my thoughts on the matter. Natural wear over time is normal and expected. Did God just speed up the process? We know the number of fighting men from the eastern tribes alone was 40,000 strong, because we already read that a few weeks ago. So think about it. The fighting men, just the army fighters, because the women and the children stayed on the east of the Jordan River. When they calculated, the strong fighting men from just the 3 tribes of the 12 was 40,000 men. So there's a lot of people, a lot of weight, okay, walking around in the same, circle, like making a big path. Did the weight of all these people, including the ark and the priests, the horns, everything else, the weight of all these people weaken the foundation, holding the walls, basically speeding up the process? Weakening the walls enough so that they would fall. Okay? Now, when you read that, you think, well, that's a naturalistic explanation. It seems to take away the miraculous. But does it? I think there's a koinonia. I think there's a harmony between the science and the miraculous. And that's why I ask this question next. If this is the case, then wouldn't this weaken the fact that this is an actual miracle? And I say no. It doesn't weaken the case for being a miracle. I think that this shows how precise and powerful God's thinking mind is. Think about how precise and powerful God's mind is. We always talk about his power. But do we ever think about how wonderful and powerful his mind is, his thinking, cognitive ability is? He was able to calculate, if this is true, he was able to calculate the weight, the time, the frequency, the effect of sound waves with the trumpets being blasted all day long, so on and so forth. All these variables, God was able to calculate it to a pinpoint accuracy. He knew exactly when those walls were going to fall. He knew exactly what day, what time, how many times would be sufficient and necessary to knock the walls down. He calculated it beforehand. How bright, how intelligent, how powerful is the mind of God. Now that to me is miraculous and wonderful. The horns. Yeah, we got two little themes to look at, and then we're going to finish it up, hopefully in the next 5 minutes. The horns. These horns are mentioned 14 times in this chapter. And the frequency is almost comical at times. I almost laughed actually reading it through because I was sick of seeing the word ram's horn. Ram's horn. It's a little bit of a tongue twister. 14 times it's said in this chapter. Look at this section alone. This is verses 12 and 13. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests again carried the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests with their ram's horns marched in front of the ark of the Lord, blowing their horns. Again, the armed men marched both in front of the priests with the horns and behind the ark of the Lord. At this time, the priests were blowing their horns. I mean, literally, it was like, oh, by the way, it's like a little, almost like a satire, like a satirical cartoon with like some guy back here go, me, hey, over here, I'm over here. And like the front scene, something's happening, and someone's up here going, trying to get the camera's attention, it's almost comical. So what's the significance of these horns? I had to ask myself that. Now here's a little lexical note I found on the Blue Letter Bible. There's a lot of lexical notes, information that collaborated from a lot of different resources. But this is interesting, and I copied this because I thought it is kind of interesting. The words, I'm not going to try to say the words. I'm not great at Hebrew. I'm not pretending like I'm great at Hebrew. So these words in these brackets should rather be rendered jubilee. Jubilee, excitement, celebration, right? Jubilee. Trumpets, i.e., such as were used on the Jubilee, which are probably made of horn, as we see here, New Living is actually translated horn, or silver. For the entrance of the Israelites into Canaan was indeed a jubilee to them, instead of the dreadful trumpet of war. Again, a lot of times we think about our walk with God and the difficult task we have at hand of evangelizing the world, we can be a bit woesome and militant about it. So we pull out our brass horns of military might. But the reality is, we should look at it quite the opposite. When we knock down these walls, we should do it not militant, not begrudgingly, and not statically, but more celebratory. Like, what an opportunity and honor it is to capture a person and bring their hearts and lives and souls into heaven. So again, they didn't blow horns of military might to fear the people, to scare the people, but they blew these horns of joy and celebration because God was giving them the town. They were ordered to sound the trumpet of joy as already conquerors. Interesting little side note that, isn't it? Another little side note. Well, what about Rahab? Did you guys ever think about that reading that story? Where was Rahab's home? You guys know very well because we read where her home was at. Was her home comfortable in the middle of the city away from the walls? No, we know because it's mentioned time and time. Here's a flashback. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will be kind to me and my family since I have helped you. Give me some guarantee that when Jericho is conquered, you may live, and my fathers, my mothers, and brothers and sisters and families, we offer our lives a guarantee for your safety. The men agreed. If you don't betray us, we will keep a promise and be kind to you when the Lord has given us land. So then, since Rahab's house was built into where? The town wall, she left them come down through a rope, and she was told to put the scarlet thread down and leave it so they can, as a sign. But look where her house was, kind of like that picture there. Literally on that wall that was falling down around her. Does that feel like your life? Like, man, my whole life is falling down around me. The walls are coming down. But, you know, what do I mean? I feel a bit scared. All she had to hold on to was God's promise. But is God's promise enough to get you through when the walls are falling down around you? Now, I know it's abstract and it's surreal, but the thing is, her home was built on the city walls. And she was told not to go hide in the safety of her human knowledge and understanding. I'm getting out of here. I'm going to go hide out in the bushes. I'm going to hide way away from these walls so I won't get hurt. But no, she was told to stay put in her house, built on the walls as the walls were falling down. Now, wouldn't that put her life at risk? I would say no, if that's what God's plan is. Because God, again, figures things out. He has it all. He's got great understanding. He's got it all figured out. God remembers, and he does intervene, even in scary times. So again, just remind us of the verses. In Joshua 6:22, meanwhile, Joshua said to the two spies, keep your promise. Go to the prostitute's house and bring her out. Which again presupposes, because we see her later on, that she was safe, and she was brought out, and she was brought to safety. The men who had been spies went in and brought her out. Her father, mother, brother, and all her relatives. So she did what was right. She was faithful. She stayed put. She did what she was asked. And she's an awesome woman. We already talked about her being the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma of Jesus, amongst other wonderful things. She's a very interesting woman. But she was faithful. She did exactly what she was told. And she was faithful even during the scary time as the walls were falling down. So they moved her and her whole family to a safe place near the camp of Israel. So Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute and her relatives who were with her in the house because she had hidden the spies Joshua sent to Jericho, and she lived among the Israelites to this day. So that's us, guys. That's us, guys. I just want to reread in a way of application the last verse. So the Lord was with Joshua. The Lord was with Joshua. That's important. Because again, from the very beginning of Joshua, it was all about, I'm with you. So be strong and courageous. The Lord was with Joshua. Here's his first act, his first military strategic maneuver. And he acted faithfully. He followed orders specifically. And they were victorious because of it. He did what God said. God was with them. And because of that, his reputation spread throughout the land. God can and does do wonderful things. So don't put him in your small boxes. Or if you already do, stop putting him in your small boxes. Right? You know what I'm saying? Like, all we're talking about, like, God, that's not going to work. I can't do that because that's just not going to work. Well, stop putting God in that box of your simple understanding, because it's a small box. Isaiah 55:8 says this, my thoughts are nothing like your thoughts, says who? Says the Lord. And my ways are far beyond anything you could imagine. For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. So, therefore, we should celebrate. Again, think about those horns. Celebrate the word of God. Don't fear them. Don't dread them. Again, it's like with Rahab. God does remember his promises that he makes to us, makes to you, makes to everyone. He will not let you down. It can be scary waiting at times, but we need to have confidence, not in ourselves, not in our power, our banks, and our jobs, and our careers, and our smartness, and so on and so forth, but confidence in him.
Oh, my great and mighty God, Jesus. Oh, my great and mighty God, Jesus. I want to be made anew and worship you, my great